Good evening, everybody. We are live. Biscuits SEC live here. Thanks for joining us tonight on this Wednesday night, just after the national championship. We appreciate you guys tuning in. We got Hammer out there in frigid Colorado. I'm here in Texas, also frigid. I know it's frigid for y'all across the South. So thank you guys anyway. Hope you're bundled up, and we're here to talk some football. We had our final college football game of the season with Ohio State and Notre Dame on Monday night. So I'm sure you guys got to watch that. Before we get started, though, please do sign up for the Biscuits and SEC newsletter, the Morning Biscuits newsletter. You can see that below here. Biscuitsandsec.com/newsletter is where you can find it. And be sure to check us out on social media at Biscuits and SEC across platforms. And obviously, you can subscribe to us on our YouTube channel at Biscuits and SEC. So please go and do that. Hammer, how are we doing tonight?
Doing good. Broadcasting from the phone again due to some technical difficulties. So if you see my fat fingers here, that's because I'm typing on my laptop and my phone camera's down there. But we persevere, and we're here to deliver you our weekly live show. So excited to be here, talk about the national title, and I guess now the off season.
Yeah, it kind of hurts to say the off season. I'm not ready for it. I wish we had a little bit more football to play, but unfortunately we do not for the 2024 season. But that leads us right to our first topic, which is the national championship game. So we saw Ohio State take down Notre Dame in an interesting game. It finally got interesting in the third quarter, late in the third quarter, as Notre Dame stormed back a little bit after going down. I put out some meme about a presidential order from President Trump as a joke saying that Notre Dame was banned from future national title games because they always get blown out. And we're sick of seeing them getting blown out. And then almost as soon as I posted that meme, Notre Dame starts coming back. So what did you think about this game? Any takeaways for you? And just kind of what did you think about this one?
Yeah, I think obviously without a dog in the hunt, I would have preferred a closer game wire to wire. But all things considered, these two teams, of course, earned the right to be there by, winning the prior games in the college football playoff. Neither team had a bye, so they'd each played 3 games previously. So really no qualm with the matchup. It kind of played out. I think I picked Notre Dame to cover, but Ohio State to win. And it ultimately Ohio State did cover. They deserved to cover. They were the better team. And it kind of played out, how I thought in a sense, right, where I did think it would be a pretty competitive game. I thought Notre Dame was good enough to hang close. They just got in too big of a hole in that first half. It looked great after the first drive for Notre Dame. They came out, played bully ball, handed it to Riley Leonard what felt like a million times and scored. And then after that, it became pretty clear that Ohio State was just not going to let Notre Dame run the ball like that to win the game. And until late in the game, when Notre Dame had to start really throwing the ball, that's really when they found some success down the field and were able to kind of claw back. But ultimately, Ohio State was the better team. I think that was pretty clear here. Will Howard played a good game. He had no turnovers, very, very solid performance from him. Quinshon Judkins had an awesome game. So ultimately, I think what we thought would happen kind of did, right, where Ohio State just had too many dudes. There's too many guys on that team. Notre Dame couldn't keep them under wraps. The Ohio State offense, had a good game, and then their defense played well also, which I think, again, you look at their defense, they've got dudes everywhere on that side of the ball too. So congratulations to Ohio State. Hurts, to have, I guess, the Big Ten win back-to-back with Michigan and now Ohio State, but hard to argue with their run through the playoffs. I think, we'll get into the playoff talk later, but they were the best team by far, at least, in the last, whatever month of the season, in the postseason, right? I don't think there's any argument about that. So ultimately, they had a lot of guys that made plays. Notre Dame fought valiantly, but does not have near the top end NFL level talent that Ohio State does, and I think that bared out on Monday night, which is a whole other rabbit hole we could go down Monday night. But anyway, we'll get your thoughts. What did you think about the game? Any key takeaways?
I was super bored for most of it, and because Ohio State jumped on them. Just we saw this when I'm forgetting the kid's name, Golson. When Golson was the quarterback for Notre Dame, and I think it was 2014 or something. I don't remember.
Talking about the Bama?
Yeah, exactly. When it was AJ McCarron just trounced him.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that was 12, I want to say, with Manti Te'o.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, and that game was extremely boring. And this one was boring up until the third quarter, until I posted that meme. And then the Notre Dame God heard me, and they got their act together a little bit more. But, there's a couple keys to the game that I had before in our preview. And, one of them was that Ohio State is going to take away the run. Like, everyone can see that. Everyone understands that. Everyone knows that. And on the first drive, after watching Notre Dame march right down the field and punch it in, I was kind of like, oh, okay, well, Ohio State's trying to take away the run, and Notre Dame just punched them straight in the mouth. So maybe they're not going to be able to stop the run tonight. And then we saw the rest of the game. They completely shut it down and dared Notre Dame to beat them through the air. And I thought Notre Dame was going to have to make a couple plays through the air in order to win this game. They were able to make a couple, but they were just way too late. So on that first drive, Notre Dame had 45 rushing yards total. The rest of the game, they had 7. So they ended up with 53 total rushing yards on the night. Jeremiah Love had 3 total yards rushing. Jadarian Price, 13 yards. So it was a combination of a couple things. One was that Ohio State was able to stop the run. They were able to do a really good job of that on the defensive side of the ball. But also they were scoring enough points, and they got ahead by so much. I don't remember what it was exactly, 31-7 or whatever it was.
31-7.
31-7. So they got up 31-7, and then Notre Dame had to play from behind. So they had to throw the ball. They had to really open up the offense, which is not what they want to do, right? Like that's not how they beat teams. They play bully ball, and they run it down your throat, and they use Riley Leonard's legs. With a couple shot plays, right? Then you get Greathouse involved a little bit, but through the air, right? We're talking about maybe throwing for 150 yards a game kind of thing, 200 yards a game. And if Notre Dame gets behind, they're not able to really come from behind. It's just not how they're built. So that key to the game ended up playing out. Ohio State was able to stop the run for Notre Dame. And then on the other side, I think you mentioned it as well, that, hey, Notre Dame's going to have to play man coverage, and they're going to have to hope that they can stop Emeka Egbuka. Can't say his name. Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith. And then also, they're going to have to try to contain those backs with Quinshon Judkins and with Travion Henderson. And also, you're going to have to hope that you can turn over Will Howard a couple times. Will Howard didn't turn the ball over, right? They did get their turnover late, but Will Howard played about as perfect a game as you can ask from him. And if he was going to be able to do that, if he was going to be able to get the ball to those stars, which he was, Jeremiah Smith had 5 receptions, 88 yards, 17 yards a catch, and a TD. If you had just shown me that stat alone before the game, I would have told you Ohio State's going to roll. And for the most part, they did. The one thing I thought was interesting was that field goal that Notre Dame missed ended up coming back to bite them, because if Notre Dame has that field goal and they score that touchdown, it's a much closer game there with 4 minutes to go. And, even though they were only down by 1 score when it was, I think it was 4 minutes to go, they were down by 1 score. If they had that field goal, it would have been even tighter. And I think that maybe you could have had Ohio State completely on their heels and the momentum totally on your side. But I thought that in the end, that missed field goal did come back to haunt Notre Dame, because I think they would have had much more momentum than they already did. So anyway, it was a fun game. It ended up being a fun game, which it started out pretty slow, but overall, good national championship. It's unfortunate that the SEC wasn't in it this year, but hopefully we can get one in next year. We had many mishaps, a couple that we can talk about when we go through our SEC postmortem here in just a little bit. But anyway, any closing thoughts there? I have the tail of the tape here. We can just check that out real quick.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to say, and this is a good segue into this graphic you put up here. My kind of takeaway was basically just that Ohio State made plays when they needed to, right? And you can see that as evidenced by their third down. 9 of 12 on third down is absurd. That's how you extend drives. That's how you finish drives with touchdowns as opposed to field goals. Just looking over the drive chart here, right? Ohio State, they kicked 2 field goals, one on their last possession of the game when they knew a field goal would seal it based on how much time was left and to be able to go from an 8 to an 11-point lead. And then their only other field goal was the drive that came after the Notre Dame missed fake punt on that fourth down. So other than, a drive at the end of the game where they knew they only needed a field goal, and then once they got stopped, not even really on a drive, they just took over in field goal range and, weren't able to get a first down. Otherwise, they were just finishing drives with touchdowns. And, 5 of 12 isn't too bad from Notre Dame, but it's, as I said, it's about making plays when a play needs to be made, and Ohio State did that. Notre Dame didn't. A big one would be that fourth down, right? I would question that call from Freeman. I thought in that situation, I was surprised he even brought his punting unit out. It was 4th and 2, and you're down 28-7. That's such an obvious Ohio State just sniffed that out, right? They it's 4th and 2, you're down by 21 points. I kind of think everybody knows you're going for this. You might as well keep your offense out there and see if you can get 2 yards. But yeah, it just, Ohio State was a better team and they made more plays, and Notre Dame was always playing from a disadvantaged standpoint. They had to play above their heads to win, and they couldn't quite do that, obviously.
Right. And you got to give credit to Ohio State. I was listening to the post game, and they got into it a little bit with Scott Van Pelt and Kirk Herbstreit and Chris Fowler, and just talking about how much Ohio State overcame after that Michigan game, right? After the Michigan game, the entire world was against them, including their own fan base, frankly. Everyone in their own fan base is already – I mean, they had Neyland North because all these Tennessee fans were coming into Ohio State because Buckeyes fans were selling their tickets because they were so done with Ryan Day. 0-4 against Michigan in the last 4 years. This guy stinks. We're done with him. And a lot of that's, teams hear that. It's inescapable these days with how media is, with, talking heads like us, talking heads like, First Take, everybody on ESPN, everybody all over social media. All these kids are on social media, right? There's very few that go dark out mode for the season. So it was inevitable that they heard all that talk, and they didn't allow it to seep through. All they did was just put their heads down, go right back to work. And as much as I like to clown on Ryan Day, got to give the guy credit. He led this team through the fire, and they went on a 4-game hot streak and ended up national champions. And, the hated team up north got the win in the rivalry game, right? But at the end of the day, they're not national champions this year, and Ohio State is. Ohio State gets the last laugh, which I think can segue us into talking about our thoughts on the initial 12-team playoff, right? The pros and cons to it, what we liked about it, what we didn't. And that actually was one thing that I didn't really like about it. I look back at it and I just think about how in years past, right? Somebody mentioned it in 2013 when Kick 6 happens. Does kick six really matter that much? Like as much importance as we put on that play and that game, if Alabama gets in right to the 12-team playoff that year, which they would have, and then goes on a tear to win the national title, I think we probably, it's in Auburn lore, and the game will be in Michigan lore for sure. But at a national level, I don't think that play matters as much. And now the Michigan win at the end of the year doesn't matter as much, right? Because Ohio State was able to go on this run and just kind of turn everybody, for the most part, into dust on their way to a national title. And now what is everybody talking about? Everybody's just talking about, well, Ryan Day is, Ryan Day. Nobody cares anymore that he was on the hot seat literally 4 weeks ago. Right? We're talking about, I don't think Ohio State's administration was on that, but everybody else was about, hey, they should probably fire this guy. He's not going to get it done. He can't win the big one. And now the narrative is completely flipped. So it definitely, there was talk that it could lessen the impact of the regular season. And I think with Ohio State winning it here, that has come to fruition. I did like the days where those rivalry games mattered a lot more because we would not be talking about Ohio State in the 14 playoff had they lost to Michigan. We would not be talking about Ohio State as national champions. So you've got a lot more leeway like you do in the pro game now in the college game with the way that it's structured.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think overall, I think the 12-team playoff is a good thing because I do think where we had it at 4, you were leaving, in some years at least, worthy teams out. Obviously, we're Aggies, so we're biased. I thought in 2020 we had a very good argument. We did not get a chance. Of course, last year, Florida State going undefeated, winning their conference and not getting a chance, I think. So I liked the idea of expanding it. In my perfect world, I probably would have settled somewhere more like 6 or 8. In which case, Ohio State still may have gotten in this year, the way things panned out. But I do think, to your point, the 12-team, and we don't need to talk about this now, but it does seem like they're probably going to expand that further. But as it stands now, the 12-team model for a select few teams, like in Ohio State, Michigan in some years, Georgia, Alabama, the upper echelon, it does diminish the regular season. Because like you said, that kick six would not carry the weight that it does. And unfortunately, that Michigan win doesn't carry the weight that it does because in a normal year, normal being BCS or even 14 playoff, or, we won't even go pre-BCS, but BCS in 14 playoff, Ohio State's done, right? They go and play in, the maybe the Rose Bowl, depending, wherever they would go, but their season in hopes of a national title would have ended in Columbus on that day. And they didn't because of the 12-team playoff. They got another chance, and I think that's what a lot of people warned about with this 12-team model was all this does, in a sense, is give really talented teams mulligans, right? And that came to fruition in year 1 where Ohio State got 2 mulligans, essentially, was still able to get in and figured things out at the end of the year. And at the end of the year, they were by far the best team, right? Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things. I feel like there's not a perfect system. Like I said before, I do think overall the 12-team playoff is good for the sport because it does allow teams like in Arizona State to get in there. And obviously they, it's not even like they made the top Final 4, but man, they were dang close. And for all the games in the regular season that do lose some meaning, like a Ohio State, Michigan, or an Iron Bowl, any team or any game late in the season where a team has only got 1 or 2 losses or 0 or 1 loss, like, yeah, if they're a big brand, they're probably going to have a mulligan and they could lose that game and still get in. And that does stink. However, there are also a ton of games that now matter between two teams that are 10-2 late in the year that in previous iterations would have long been eliminated. So I think it's just a balance, and we'll see how this goes moving forward with who ends up actually winning these, because my one worry would be I would like to see, this scenario playing out where you have an uber talented team stumbles a little bit in the regular season and then figures it out and wins. I just hope that doesn't become the norm, right? I think it's going to happen every few years, absolutely. But it would be unfortunate if you're constantly getting these national championship teams that didn't have a great regular season by even their own standards, but, still get in and win. Because, I look around this particular playoff iteration, and the way it played out, Oregon has no argument because Ohio State beat them. However, kind of stinks that the 12-team playoff happened this year for Oregon, because they go undefeated, win the Big Ten, beat Ohio State in the regular season, and then turn around and have to play them again in the playoff. And it's like, dang, man, any other year, we would not have to see this team again. The regular season game would have sealed their fate. It would have been the game that mattered. We've already beaten them. But under this new model, dang, we got to play them again. And, so it stinks for a team like that. But, again, at the end of the day, they lost badly. So I don't think they have a great argument. It's just, there's pros and cons to every system. I think overall it was good. The home playoff games were awesome. It created a ton of awesome environments and matchups. And, it's hard to argue at the end of the day that the two best teams squared off, right? When you play those games and it's decided on the field, the hypotheticals go away. And, whether or not the system is quote unquote fair, I guess people can debate, but those, like I said, Ohio State and Notre Dame just played 4 extra games, and Ohio State went 4-0, and it's hard to argue with those results.
Yeah, it's I think people have to recalibrate their expectations a little bit, in terms of what we have known for a long, long time in college football, even going back to the days when it was decided by, the AP and the polls, was that you didn't really have mulligans, right? Like, unless you got a year where most of those teams at the top ended up with one loss, where you could have a split national championship, or, it just ended up being a consensus national championship. You had the margin for error was so slim, and now that's not necessarily the case. So do I think everyone's still going to continue to freak out over losses? Yeah, I think that's the case. I just think that's how college football is built and how the fan bases are built. But, it would be smart to recalibrate expectations a little bit, because, right now we're talking about Will Howard, and to think about the narrative about him and how much it has changed from that loss against Oregon early in the year, when he had, if folks remember, that terrible slide at the end of the game, which ran the clock out and allowed Oregon to win that game. Does Ohio State win that game even if Will Howard, doesn't slide? Probably not, actually. Probably not. However, doesn't matter. That was the play that happened. So he became the scapegoat in that game. He took it on the chin, took it really hard mentally. Didn't matter, came back out, won up until the Michigan game, and then they can't get anything done on offense. And, people are at his throat again, at Ryan Day's throat. What the heck was the offense doing? That was unbelievable. And now he's a hero. He's a hero for all time at Ohio State. In just last year, if the same season plays out, they do not get in the 14 playoff, and Will Howard's viewed as someone who didn't get it done at Ohio State. And he would have been viewed as a scapegoat for that team. And now he's a hero forever. So it's completely different in how it has changed that. So it's made for very interesting storylines. Like, that's a very interesting storyline to talk about. And it also means to me that you're going to need more chaos, right? Like, this sport thrives on chaos. We love the chaos. We love all the upsets, all of that, right? It's awesome that Vanderbilt beat Alabama earlier in the year, right? But even after that happened, we were still talking about how Alabama is in, right? If the playoffs were decided today, Alabama would be in the playoffs, right? And they still had up until they played Oklahoma, and Oklahoma throttled the Tide. People were still saying Alabama's in, shoe in, basically, right? And then they got beat by Oklahoma. So in previous years, you only needed so much chaos to happen in order to really shake up that top 10, top 5 for the playoff and for the BCS bowls. And now it's changed to you need a ton of chaos. And we had a ton of chaos this year. We had a ton of chaos, but it just wasn't enough for some of these teams like the Ohio States of the world, to be out. Although they were close too. Lest we forget, Nebraska had those guys on the ropes and almost handed them what would have been 3 losses on the year, and they would not have made the college football playoff. So overall, though, I did really enjoy the first year of the college football playoff with the 12 teams in it. Made for some awesome games. Like you said, that was one I was going to hit on. The home games and the home atmospheres in the first round were fantastic. And if anything, I would actually say that the next round, right, should be home games as well. It's awesome that the Fiesta Bowl is in Arizona. I love all the history of those things. There's only one game in my mind of the bowls that it matters where it's played, and that's the Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl to me should be the national championship every single year. I don't think I understand the issues. I know why the Rose Bowl doesn't want to do that because of the timing and everything like that with the Rose Bowl parade, whatever. I think we might need to break a little bit of tradition there, make it the national title game every single year, make it in Pasadena, and the other games, the Fiesta Bowl, the Orange Bowl, whatever, let's make those the bowls. It can still be the Orange Bowl, but it needs to be played at home,
I agree. I think the second round needs to be on campus as well for 2 reasons. A, college football games are better on campus, plain and simple. B, the teams that get a bye don't get to host a home playoff game. And don't get me wrong, I understand the bye is still better, right? It is a lot better to not play a game than to play a game. But it does stink.
Everybody lost.
They did lose. That's fair. That's a fair point. I still think if you're a coach, you take that bye, though. But anyway. But they don't get a host, right? So it's like, okay, great, we get a bye, and then we got to go to a neutral site, and then another neutral site, and then another neutral site. It's just too much. It's too much on fans. We saw that reflected in ticket prices because, you have a school like Texas, goes to Atlanta for the SEC title game, then host a playoff game, and then they go to – where did they go?
I think Arizona. Was it? No, it wasn't Arizona.
I can't even remember. Dallas. They went to the Cotton Bowl.
They're in Arlington. You're right. Yeah.
And then they went to Atlanta again. That's too much, right? And they should have – those games need to be on campus for those reasons. And the other thing I think, too, that, when it comes to the bowls, I agree. I think it's just time, play those bowls – not in the playoffs. I'm sorry. I love the history and tradition of them too, but this is a totally new model. This is a playoff. This is not a bowl system any longer. And if you prefer that it's a bowl system, then I'm sorry, because we've kind of moved on from that. It's not a bowl system any longer. Those games could still be very fun, right? You could have South Carolina, Illinois was a very entertaining game. That could have been the Orange Bowl or something, because it makes no sense. We're shoehorning in the Fiesta Bowl in a quarterfinal game. I mean, who cares? Nobody cares that it's the Fiesta Bowl. It's a college football playoff game. It's not the Fiesta Bowl. No one cares that they won the Fiesta Bowl. You know what I mean? And to your point about tradition, the only one that even plays at the same traditional stadium is the Rose Bowl. All the other ones are, it's a traditional town, but they're, the Mercedes-Benz at the Peach Bowl, the Hard Rock instead of the Orange Bowl, the Superdome for the Sugar Bowl, Jerry World for the Cotton Bowl. It's not the Cotton Bowl. So, we've already left behind much of the tradition that those, whatever you want to call them, BCS or traditionally big bowl games carry. So personally, I think it's time to not get rid of them, of course, but remove them from the playoff because it just doesn't make sense. Nobody cares. And it's you're shoehorning something in there that doesn't belong, I think.
I tend to agree. Yeah. I mean, it's like I said earlier, the one game to me that hasn't broken tradition and that has held steadfast and just has deeper tradition than all of them is the Rose Bowl. And I would like to uphold that tradition. And if there's a way that the college football powers that be could make that the national championship game every year, I think it would be fantastic. It is a little bit different that it's not on, New Year's Day, and it would be around January 20th every year. It's a little different, but.
Well, that's another thing we can talk about because I don't know how you get a 12-team playoff to be done on New Year's Day. However, I think January 20th is too late. It got swallowed up by the NFL.
Yeah.
Nobody was talking. I mean, the semifinals were great, got a ton of coverage. Nobody was talking about this game hardly, like from a national perspective. And it was Ohio State and Notre Dame, like the biggest brands that they could possibly be. And, you can't go up against the NFL. I don't know how you fix that, but ending January 20th, I think, is a little late.
It was also, from a national perspective, the inauguration, which that will not happen every year. But,
True. Doesn't help.
There was, right, from a news perspective, the zone was flooded, and you are going up against the behemoth of the NFL. So, that was just not smart planning. So I'm with you. I don't know how you change that. I don't know if you can move it up, but I do think that we're getting late, and the scheduling should have been done a little bit better. Which, hey, again, it was the first year, right? There's things that they're going to iterate on, they're going to think about, and they're going to fix. I know they had meetings before the national championship game on that Sunday with the director of the college football playoff talking about some potential changes that may be coming. Sounds like the 12-team playoff, for those who did not see, is going to be still there next year. They may make a couple slight changes, but that just tells you 16-team playoff is on the horizon. I think we're probably going to 16 fairly soon, which that's a whole nother rabbit hole to get down for another show. But anyway, okay, let's move on here. Let's do the SEC postmortem on 2024. Just wanted to talk a little bit about the season, some of our favorite moments, what this year was like in the SEC, and also the fact that we didn't end up getting one in the national title game, which is pretty wild. After winning it for so many years straight up until last year, SEC again, nowhere to be found in the national title. So what were a couple of your thoughts on this season? Anything stick out to you on 2024?
Yeah, I think I think overall this was a down year for the SEC, and I don't think I see a lot of people on both sides of this argument, right? There's a lot of people, whether they're writers or just people on Twitter, who, for whatever reason, are very, anti-SEC or anti-SEC bias, right? It's like the SEC bias that they perceive has gone so far that now they're, going out of their way to point out the SEC's flaws or when the SEC is down. And so, I think admitting that the SEC was down this year for a lot of people is a little bit touchy because they don't want to, admit that or give any credence to those type of people that are saying those things. But I think it's pretty clear that top to bottom, the SEC was down. I think they're still the best conference top to bottom. I think that will bear out in the NFL draft yet again. At least on a per team basis. Now I know the Big Ten has 18 teams, so they have two more teams. But like on a per team, average, I would assume that the SEC will continue that run of dominance with a number of guys drafted. But I think what really hurt the SEC this year, and we've talked about this on this show on SEC After Dark a couple times, there was just not elite quarterback play. I think probably the best quarterback maybe it was Jackson Dart or late season Lenora Sellers. I mean, there was just nobody that really, there was nobody that played a full, like, great 12 games. There was some flash in the pans from a whole litany of guys that came out and looked like a Heisman winner one week, and then they have a couple games where they don't look good and their teams lose and they're getting beat. So I really think that's what hurt them. And you look at the teams that went far in the playoff. Will Howard, for all the crap he got, was very steady, very consistent. Riley Leonard, very steady, very consistent. Not that these are, top 5 NFL draft guys, but like just in terms of a college quarterback and a leader of your team, like very, very steady. Drew Aller, very, very steady, very good. Quinn Ewers, steady, good, right? He maybe was better than, Dart, Ewers, whoever you want, but like the rest of the league just really struggled with consistency at that position. And I think that's, kind of what hurt him, because you look around, like the offenses this year were just not very good. Maybe that's like a larger theme of college football where, hey, the defenses are kind of catching up. There's always that sort of cat and mouse game where, all right, the offense innovates, defenses are getting creamed, and then the defenses adjust and catch back up. And then, so maybe we're starting to see that. But I just thought overall that the quarterbacks and the offenses across the league were down. And as a result, teams were vulnerable within the conference and beat up on each other. And you end up only getting 3 teams in. And then when those 3 teams go up against other elite teams, they end up losing, right? I think a good example would be Tennessee. Tennessee, very good season, deserved to be there. Nico was lost in that game. I mean, you lose to the eventual national title winners in Ohio State in the horseshoe, so there's no shame in that, but they had no chance, because their offense was lost. So that was kind of my like general takeaway and like post-mortem is like, hey, I'm not hitting the panic button. I think the league is very strong. The passion is there monetarily. All these programs are very competitive. It's not like the SEC is losing out on NIL. I don't think that's the case. I think it just so happened that this year there was a lot of quarterbacks that were inconsistent. There was a lot of offenses that were inconsistent. And, at the end of the day, 2 of the 3 teams that made the playoff got beat by the eventual national title winner in Ohio State, and the other one lost to Notre Dame with a backup quarterback. So I'm not raising the panic button. Well, how about you?
I mean, I think it's a good point about the quarterbacks. It goes to your point that there wasn't elite quarterback play in the conference when you can make an argument for 4 guys, 5 guys in the conference, that you could, any of those 4 to 5, you could make a good argument for being the top quarterback or the best quarterback, the most talented, the one who played the best throughout the year. There was no clear cut 1 or 2 where it was like 100% it's that guy, right? Jackson Dart, Quinn Ewers, there was Carson Beck. You had Lenora Sellers play really well at times. Garrett Nussmeier play really well at times. Diego Pavia play really well at times. I mean, there was a handful of guys that all played really well. Were all above average quarterbacks. But there was not that guy like a Bryce Young, that you would just point to and be like, oh yeah, that, he's the top quarterback or 1-2 right in the league. And I do think that hurt him. And that also goes to show, I think in this new era with the 12-team playoff and the portal, that quarterback matters more than it ever has. You can go back to those teams in Alabama before Lane Kiffin got there with Nick Saban. I mean, what did they do? They won multiple national titles with game manager quarterbacks. And you really just cannot do that anymore. You have to have a quarterback who is consistent, who runs your offense well, runs your offense efficiently. And, you don't necessarily have to have a guy who's going to light up the stat sheet anymore. Like you said, it seems like defenses are catching up. Riley Leonard wasn't lighting up the stat sheet through the air all season. Nor was Will Howard. There was multiple games where he wasn't lighting up the stat sheet. In fact, they lost a couple of those games, right? But because you have those mulligans and because you need to make deep playoff runs, you're going to have to play, multiple three more games, 3 extra games than you were ever going to have to play before. Consistency and talent at quarterback matters more than it ever has. And you can look at teams within the SEC and see how much that matters, right? Like Jalen Milroe at Alabama. If they had a quarterback who was a little bit more consistent than Jalen Milroe, Alabama's in the playoff. And they learned it the hard way this year that you got to have a quarterback that is not necessarily elite, right? But at least at the Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers level, that can get you to the play, at least get into the playoff, right? At this point, it's just about get into the playoff.
Yeah.
The other thing I took away from this year is there's a lot of fun moments, and I'll touch on those in a second. It was a really fun year in the SEC, tons of chaos, right? Just chaos all over the place. Everyone knows, and we've talked about this for years, as to why the SEC is so good from top to bottom, is that these teams just beat up on each other, right? There's always 1 to 2 games a year at least where you've got a team that you don't expect going into that game that ends up winning that game, right? I mean, this year there was a lot more of those, it seemed like, than there are in past years, especially when we're talking about taking out those teams at the top. Those teams at the top typically are, no losses, 1 loss at the most, right? You got 2 or 3 teams at the top of the SEC who are right there with no losses, 1 loss. This year, you didn't have that, right? I mean, you did have Texas, right? Texas with their easy candy ass schedule, they went 7-1.
Yep.
In conference. Georgia goes 6-2, 2 losses. Tennessee, 2 losses. Alabama, 3 losses, right? So there was a little bit more parity in the league this year than there has been in past years. That doesn't mean the league's not deep. In fact, I think it means the league was deeper than it has been in normal years. So it was a lot of fun though. Like I'll give you a couple of moments that I really enjoyed this year. There were many, but like Kentucky over Ole Miss early in the year. Like, oh, hey, Ole Miss is supposed to be going, right? And this is their year. Kentucky says, no, I don't think so. No, it's not. And Kentucky stunk the rest of the year. But on that day,
that was their only conference win. Was
that's
in
right.
Washington.
Yeah, and they almost got Georgia too, by the way.
They did.
So folks may forget that. That was early, I think week 3 maybe. But yeah, Kentucky over Ole Miss, Vanderbilt over Alabama. My gosh, I never thought I'd see that in my lifetime, honestly. And we got to see it this year. Diego Pavia plays a great game. Ryan Williams catch against Georgia to beat Georgia. What an electric catch, electric atmosphere after that in Tuscaloosa. That was awesome. Auburn takes down Texas A&M late in the year. We saw Texas A&M, Texas rivalry renewed in College Station. Arkansas takes down Tennessee. No one's expecting Arkansas. I forget I think Tennessee was a double-digit favorite in that game. And then losing in Vietnam. And then 2 other things that came to mind for me were Mizzou. For all the crap I talked about Mizzou this year, Mizzou still ended up being 10-2 to end the year, right? Like, that's impressive. 10-3 overall. Like,
yeah. I think 9-3 regular season, 10.
Sorry, 9-3 regular. Yeah, they got the bowl right. So 10-3 overall, 9-3 regular season. And then, hey, another one. Credit to Shane Beamer. What he's doing in Columbia with South Carolina. What an impressive season for those guys. Everybody, including myself, talking about how he's on the hot seat to start out this year, as he should have been. And then he goes out in the first couple games, Old Dominion has them on the ropes in Williams-Brice, and they eke it out, right? And then the first couple of weeks, I believe they started out the year, what was it, 3-3, I think, right? Or something like that. I can't remember.
Oh, gosh. I'd have to think back on it. Yeah, you might be right, though, because they lost to Bama, which was a crazy game. Should have beat Bama, but lost to Bama.
LSU.
That was early. Yeah, they lost to LSU early. Also should have beat LSU.
Yes. Got robbed. Totally robbed. And then they lost to Ole Miss. They got whooped by Ole Miss, 27-3.
That's right. Yeah, I bet you they did. It was 3-3 or 4-3, something like that.
and then they ripped off 6 straight wins, and we're on the cusp of the college football playoff. So awesome season in Columbia. I'm really interested to see what they do for the encore. What does 2025 look like for the South Carolina Gamecocks, because they have Lenora Sellers coming back. That game against Illinois didn't look so good, but it's a bowl game, and there's so much craziness that happens in the bowl game. We got a comment here from Thuzero. Get used to seeing the Big Ten skull drag the SEC. I don't think you should be talking too much crap after 15 years of the SEC skull drag in the Big Ten for many, many years. Plus, I think you ought to look at Ohio State's record against the SEC before you start talking a lot of smack. But love that you're here. We love talking smack, so that's fun. But hey,
yeah,
2 straight years. Yeah.
All's fair in love and war, right?
That's right.
The last 2 national titles are in Big Ten countries, so I agree. The body of work speaks for itself, but the last 2 have gone to the Big Ten, so it is what it is. He's got bragging rights at the moment, so there's not a ton that can be said until somebody from the SEC comes through in the 12-team playoff. I think that'll be very interesting to see. Just on that note, and we can kind of transition here into like the SEC 2025, what we see here, and maybe just college football as a whole. But I'm very interested to see, like, with this new 12-team model, as I kind of mentioned earlier, and this is not any different than what it was before, when you had, a very select few teams coming into a year that actually had a chance to win national title. But with this 12-team playoff, like, I think of a team like Ole Miss, for example, right, was very hyped coming into the year. And had they gotten in, I think they would have had a decent shot of winning it, but ultimately didn't make it. But like, in this 12-team model, does a team like that actually have a chance? Because yes, they might get access, but are they going to be able to win 4 games like Ohio State just reeled off against, other top 12 teams? I won't say elite because, they might not all be elite, but like, I think Indiana was a good example, right? Indiana kind of comes out of nowhere, sort of a Cinderella story. But then they get in the playoff and they get handled, which I think a lot of us kind of anticipated. And it's like, historic season for them, great season, in probably the best season Indiana's ever had. But everyone kind of knew they didn't actually have a chance. And so I just wonder how that's going to shake out in 2025 and beyond, of like, okay, great. And, another example maybe would be like Tennessee, right? Like, let's say they do the same thing next year. They go 10-2, and then they get ousted in the first round of the college football playoff. Like,
skull drag.
Yeah, skull drag by a Big Ten team. But from their fan base perspective, it's like, is that good enough? Like, is that what you want? Is that okay now? And maybe it is. I'm not saying, 10-2, going to the playoff every year. Trust me, as an A&M fan, there are places a lot darker than that. And Tennessee fans, y'all know there are places a lot darker than that. So be careful what you wish for. But I'm just throwing that question out there, right? When does it become that making the playoff is not enough any longer? And what schools are going to think that way? It's just a different dynamic, like you mentioned earlier, with the 12-teamer. It's a totally different. Your expectations are different. Your kind of thought process is different. And so I'm fascinated to see how that adjusts over time. I mean, I think a good example, the Big Ten, skull dragging that we saw from Ohio State in years past. Ryan Day might have been fired because for the 4th straight year, he didn't beat Michigan and he didn't win the Big Ten. So, lucky for him and for Ohio State, the format is what it is now, and they earned the national title on the field. But just a very different landscape moving forward, and I'm interested to see how that impacts and kind of shapes the sport.
Yeah, I mean, one team to touch on, to think about in that vein of like, is the college football playoff, like, when is that not enough? I think it could go either way. You'd probably find people on both sides of the fence on this, but that's Penn State with James Franklin, right? James Franklin, he's the king of going 10-2. I mean, everybody clowns on A&M for Texas 8-4. Well, Penn State's got the same problem. They're just 10-2. They win a couple more games than A&M,
right?
And they've been at a higher level than A&M has. But is that enough for James Franklin now to do the exact same thing he has been doing for many years, which is going 10-2? But now is it okay because he's making the college football playoff or he's making the semifinal? Does he have to make the quarterfinals? To me, it's probably good enough because if you're making the playoff, like you're in and you've got the chance, and at some point, right, maybe you can break through, much like Ryan Day. But I don't know, how many years of going to the semifinals or getting knocked out in the first round of the playoffs are Penn State fans going to take before they're sick of it? And how many years of them continuing to lose to Ohio State and continuing to lose to Michigan, right, and dropping a game that they shouldn't drop? How many years are Penn State fans going to take that? I don't know. That's a good question. In the SEC next year, though, there's so many storylines. The one big one that stands out to me, I guess you could go team by team, right? I think we'll do more of that later in the offseason as we kind of look ahead to 2025, kind of see all the rosters settle in once we have everything from the portal in, and these rosters are much more set. But right now I'm thinking about, for all those folks watching us on Stephen Willis's Twitter, Ole Miss, right? You're losing Jackson Dart. You've got a lot of talent still there. You got Austin Simmons, right? Austin Simmons, I'm sure all the Ole Miss folks saw it, that he put up on Instagram, like, we're going to be here. So Ole Miss is going to spend a lot of money. They got a lot of players in the portal again, and they're expecting to be right back where they are and to make the playoff next year. So I'm interested to see what that looks like. And then the other one that came to mind was Alabama. Does Alabama take a step forward and get back to where they feel like they should be, which is in the playoff, with Jalen Milroe leaving, with is it going to be Ty Simpson? Is it going to be it's not going to be Lonergan. It's going to be I'm forgetting the other quarterback who's there right now. It's a freshman. Anyway.
Yeah, he's some Gatorade Player of the Year. I can't remember. Yeah. Or it could be the kid from Washington.
Or it could be the kid from Washington. So they have three potential quarterbacks there. So who's going to step in for Jalen Milroe? And are they able to get back to that college football playoff national championship level in year 2 under Kalen DeBoer? And we'll see if that's the case or not. And if it's not, I don't think Alabama fans are going to be too happy with another 9-3. And if that starts to be the level in Tuscaloosa, that is not T-Town, Title Town. That is not where they want to be. So I'm fascinated to see what happens with Alabama next year, because the heat is starting to turn up quickly in Tuscaloosa. What about you? Anything you're looking for in the SEC in 25?
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said there. I think there's a ton of different storylines. A few that I'm fascinated with myself are LSU. Brian Kelly made the comments late in the year that they're going to win a national title and all this and all that. And Nussmeier's coming back. But they're losing some guys on the O-line. Their defense has just not been good. It improved under Baker this year. So year 2, they might take a big step forward. But, another season like Kelly had, he might just get run out of the bayou. So I think it's a very, very important season for Kelly. Another storyline I'm fascinated with, for someone who is squarely on the hot seat, is Brent Venables. I mean, that was an abysmal season for them. Their first year in the SEC. 2 out of his 3 years there, they've gone, I think, 6-6. Not going to cut it in Norman. And I don't know. I guess they got the Washington State transfer, so they're throwing all their eggs in that OC/QB combo bucket coming out of Wazoo. So we'll see if that works. So very interested in Oklahoma, and I think they're losing a fair bit on defense too, which was their strength. So they've got a lot of holes to fill. Very interested to keep an eye on them. And then real quick before we close it out, I'll just mention, the 2 Texas schools. So we're kind of going Big 12, old Big 12 or Southwest Conference here, but Texas is replacing a ton. We chronicled this in the newsletter after they, were eliminated. Gunnar Helm, multiple. I think Isaiah Bond, Matthew Golden, like all their receivers are gone except for Wingo. Tight end is gone. Multiple running backs gone. The entire offensive line, or maybe just 4 out of the 5?
4 out of 5. Yeah.
So 4 out of your 5 offensive linemen are gone. Of course, Quinn is gone. Multiple guys on defense gone. So I know they've recruited well, but this is a very big test for Sarkisian and puts a lot of pressure, in my opinion, on Arch. He's not going to be starting and coming into a situation where, all right, I've got a big experienced offensive line. I've got a ton of receivers. I've got 2 pro wide receivers. Like, it's just inexperience across the board, including him. So will be fascinating to see how that unfolds, especially just because his name is Arch Manning. And then the Aggies, right? Our Aggies, the other team in Texas, Mike Elko, year 2, he made some changes on the defensive side. I don't know if you saw that. Brought in a guy from James Madison who was previously under him at Duke. It looks like Bateman basically got demoted to be more of the linebackers, front 7-ish guy, and Elko's going to be more involved. So he's making some tweaks on the defensive side of the ball. And, I think they're interesting. Obviously, we're biased, but just from an outsider or an SEC fan perspective, I mean, A&M was leading the SEC until the last 2 weeks of the season when they blew it and lost to Auburn and Texas. So that team was right there. I think it was clear after they lost those 2 games that, like, hey, they weren't actually ready, but they found themselves in that situation. So it'll just be interesting to see in year 2, right? Marcel Reed is cemented as the starter. Year 2 under Colin Klein in his system. They lost a fair bit to the portal, but not really, not many guys like going pro. So they're not losing a ton of like NFL talent. They've been very active in the portal, especially on offense at wide receiver. So I think they're a fascinating team in 2025 as well.
The defensive line at A&M is what fascinates me. They're losing a lot along the defensive line, and that defensive line was good at times and played very well. I think they actually underperformed from what they were expected to do preseason, and they got gashed multiple times in the run game. But they were a lot of big bodies. A lot of those guys are going to be NFL draft picks. You got Scorton, 100% will be. And Shamar Stewart and Shamar Turner will both get drafted as well. So who comes in behind those guys? Does DJ Hicks or David Hicks step up? How does he play going forward? You're also losing the big guy in the middle, who I'm forgetting his name right now. Albert Regis. I think he's gone. He may be back.
He might come back. I think he's
graduate year.
I think he may.
Anyway, that defensive line for A&M, I think it's going to be fascinating to watch because something has to change on the defensive side of the ball. That was not going to cut it. You had Des Ricks on the outside, former 5-star cornerback, did not play well towards the end of the season, which is why you saw A&M go into the portal and get a couple of defensive backs as well. So A&M certainly fascinating. I'm also fascinated with Florida. Really interested to see if Billy Napier can build on the momentum that they had this year. Everybody left them for dead, and they left Billy Napier for dead, including me. I thought they were going to fire him after maybe the A&M game, frankly.
A&M game. Yeah.
I thought it was done. And, credit to that guy. He just kept working, and he's got Florida in a real position to make a jump next year. And he knew what he had in DJ Lagway, and I think he actually played it very well, right? He had Graham Mertz, who played well up until his injury, and I don't think DJ Lagway was ready just yet. And then Lagway had to step in and plays extremely well, even with his injury, and gets a win against Ole Miss as well late in the year to show what they really could be. And he'll be 100% healthy going into 2025. So I'm fascinated to see what happens down in Gainesville to see if they can make another jump. And I think DJ Lagway is the truth. That kid, we're talking about how the SEC was down in terms of quarterback play this year. I think it's very possible that you see DJ Lagway make a big jump next year and be the guy. Like the SEC's looking at him saying, yeah, clear cut, this guy's the best quarterback in the SEC. I think that's very possible. So, all right, that I think will do it for looking ahead to 2025. And obviously we'll do a lot more of that throughout the offseason. But finally, Yeah, plenty of time to talk about it. But all right, I did a little bit of research here. I got we're not going to do Must Champ Coach of the Week this week. It was one game, so it was either going to be Freeman or Ryan Day, and I'm not giving Ryan Day back to back.
We'll give an honorary shout out, and this is not even something that I think Will Muschamp would do, but just a shout out to the golf cart driver, the woman driver of the golf cart. Unfortunately, I feel bad for her, honestly, because she's just going to be known for that for the rest of her life. But very funny scene when she just drives the golf cart directly into the wall with Ryan Day, Will Howard, and a few other Ohio State guys in trying to get a ride to the press conference in the bowels of the stadium down there. And poor girl just buried the golf cart into the wall. I really don't know what happened down there, but if you haven't seen that, go watch that. That can be your replacement for the Muschamp Coach of the Week.
Yeah, I did think about putting that in there, but I've already felt bad enough for that girl that I didn't want to put her on blast again. But good for Will Howard for laughing it off, and Ryan Day and the rest of the crew. They had to end up walking down to the press conference, which was pretty funny.
Yeah, I think the golf cart's axle had broken, so they couldn't drive it.
That tire was like this, it was not upright anymore. The axle was done, so
yeah,
it was immobile. They couldn't use that cart. So,
yeah.
All right, biscuit of the week. If you guys have a biscuit that you would like to have shared on the show, please let us know. You can send us a DM, or you can hit us up at contact@biscuitsandSEC.com. You can send us a picture, or we would love to see your homemade ones, or also any of the local diners, local establishments that you guys like to check out across the SEC footprint. We love showing those. So this week I was looking around, poking around in Athens, and check this out. Athens, Georgia. This is Cafe Racer, and they make incredible biscuits, as you can see right there. They also do donuts and coffee. It was founded in 2018 by Christopher and Gabriella Hart. And they originally had a small standing location in Crawford, which is about 10 miles from Athens. And they also had a food truck that became super popular around the area. And now they've got a location that they opened in August of 2023 that's just about a mile west of Athens on Highway 78. And you can see to the left, that one is what's called My Pleasure, a nod to Chick-fil-A there, I think. Fried chicken, scrambled egg, pepper jack cheese, flaky biscuit, looks awesome. And then on the right is the Cowboy, which is sausage, fried egg, jalapeno cream cheese, hot sauce, and they also put cheddar on top of the biscuit and crust it. So the cheddar crust top on that biscuit, which looks absolutely amazing. And there was so many I wanted to feature. They have multiple other, I think there's like 6 or 7 options for biscuit sandwiches that you can get there. All of them have, really, really cool different combinations you can get. The donuts they make are potato donuts, which is kind of a shout out to Spud Nuts, which is something that we grew up with in Charlottesville, Virginia. But they make these potato glazed donuts. They have cinnamon sugar, cookies and cream, apple chamomile, hot cocoa donuts, some kind of interesting flavors. And that's not all of them. There's more that I didn't list. And they also do tacos and burritos there. So anyway, if you guys are in the Athens area, make sure to check out Cafe Racer. It looks absolutely fantastic. And the next time that I am in Athens, I will be checking out Cafe Racer. So what'd you think of those? I was pretty pumped when I found those.
Yeah, those look very good. If I was in and around Athens, I'd be there Saturday morning, undoubtedly.
I'd be there every Saturday morning, I think, and maybe more during the week too. So Cafe Racer, if y'all are around Athens, go check out Cafe Racer. So, all right. That is going to do it for tonight's show. Thank you guys all for tuning in. We appreciate it. As always, sign up there for the Biscuits and SEC newsletter, the Morning Biscuits newsletter. I write it on Mondays. Hammer writes it on Fridays. We'll be moving to once a week as we get into the off season. More football-focused newsletter, but we also cover SEC basketball, baseball, women's basketball, all sorts of stuff. So we'll have a lot of good stuff going throughout the offseason there. And then during the season, it is twice a week. So Morning Biscuits newsletter. Sign up right there at that link. And also make sure to check us out on social media at Biscuits and SEC across platforms. And check us out on YouTube at Biscuits and SEC as well. And make sure to subscribe and hit that little bell so that you don't miss an episode on Wednesdays. So thank you guys again for Hammer. I'm Bossman. We will see you guys next week.
Appreciate y'all.